How can you not have read his 700-page book and come down to the same conclusion as me?
I'm not sure.
Rarely do you find out the Earth circles around the sun.
Right.
There are some people who come in and go, no.
They can then say, aha.
Like it goes on in this interpretation. And I'm like, okay. Dr. Josh, the UFOs have left and gone. In the
Alhamdulillah.
Yes. And I think the UFO is a euphemism for landscaping. But
yes.
We apologize for the audio there. For the record, it left a bad taste in people's mouths because one of the brightest people I know is Richard Carrier. Yeah. I'm interviewing him later this month on Axe, and I don't want people walking away going, oh, you just poo-pooed on the thing. That's not at all. And I do think there is a bit of contrarianism. You brought up Israel Finkelstein. So, give us your analogy there, and let's freestyle this.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are scholars that are not afraid to go down paths that they're not sure where they lead, right? And it's something that you have to do, like when you write your dissertation. But it's a scary thing to do even then, right? Because you might spend 2 years doing all this research and going, at the end of it, shoot, and you don't want to feel like you've wasted your time. And I'm very much somebody that naturally doesn't like to buck the system. I don't like doing that. It's uncomfortable. I don't like ultimately being wrong, which is for everybody watching. I think that should give you some security because I don't like going out on a ledge when it comes to the data that I give. So what I write, what I talk about normally is very secure.
And you're usually that's outside of my expertise.
Yes, yeah.
Or if it isn't, let's say you dabble, because you dabble in the Hebrew Bible
Sure.
a lot. You've written on this. We'll get questions, of course, from Patreon members and stuff. And you'll be like, I haven't read that. I really don't feel comfortable commenting on it without knowing more. Yeah. You'll probably defer to the consensus.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. But I think that...
You're very secure about what you are, and you're pointing out some scholars are definitely willing to go down paths.
Yes. And the thing is, it takes an inquisitive mind and a sharp mind to notice things. And it's something that I actually really admire because that's one of the hardest parts of writing a dissertation, right? Or writing a new monograph where you're trying to break new ground is you've got to see things other people haven't seen. And so, to give an example, it's very much in my mind like somebody like James Hoffmeyer. I think James Hoffmeyer is a brilliant man, right? I think Richard Averbeck, brilliant man. I think Lawson Younger, brilliant man. I'm listing the whole faculty or formal faculty up at Trinity. But I'm mentioning them because they are evangelicals, that when that radar sweeps a particular way, and Hoffmeyer and his work, excavation work at Tel El Borg, I'm sure it's top notch. And I'm sure that the work that is done by people like Kenneth Kitchen and Richard Averbeck, of course, wrote on Gudea, and as an Assyriologist, he studied under Oka Schoberg. He's good, right? But I think that there are times when prior commitments can come in. And so in these circumstances, like with James Hoffmeyer in the Exodus, I think scholarship starts to butt heads a little bit with theological commitments. And so in that sense, I have to be picky, right? And I have to say, okay, I think you have brilliant scholarship over here, but I can't really go with you here. That doesn't mean that I think because he's wrong here, that he's wrong everywhere. Of course I don't, right? And so somebody like Finkelstein, and it's not like I've delved into all the archaeology, obviously, that he's done, or even a 16th of it. I mean, he's a brilliant scholar. But of course, people like William Deaver would say, they butt heads all the time, right? And they say, no, that's not right, and no, that's not right. And I think that if you have the Constitution to be able to say, I don't really care if I'm wrong at the end of this, or it's not going to bother me if I have to go, I guess that didn't work out. That it allows you to take those, paths less beaten, right?
Right.
And to be able to say, maybe there's something down here. Maybe there's something down here.
And we need that.
Yes.
So I don't want this to be a jab at the scholars,
right,
or the scholarship. I learn from everyone. that I am a student, and I always want to remain one on MythVision. I hope to create more students. I'm trying to stop, I guess, the tribalism that happens from the online communities. You have people who ethically would line up, but they're no longer friends because they disagree over whether Jesus existed or didn't. And it got so polemical, so much emotion got involved, so much, you're an idiot, I can't believe that, or you're being dishonest, I can't believe you. Richard wrote his book, haven't you? How could you not have read his 700-page book and come down to the same conclusion as me? And it's like, okay, I'm reading that, and I'm reading, 50 other books that are elaborating on details here, and I'm weighing it out in my head and making what I think makes the most sense. And the interesting thing is, I'm talking about very critical scholars that aren't apologists, that aren't evangelicals, who appreciate that Richard is doing a mythicist kind of monograph, trying to argue that maybe Jesus didn't exist. He gives it a 1/3 chance that he did exist, so he's more on the side that he didn't. 2/3 he didn't, 1/3 he did. But they give him like a thumbs up, say, hey, cool, we salute you. That's cool that you're doing that. We're not convinced, but we appreciate it. Then you have some that he has enemies with, because Richard does have enemies in the scholarly world and vice versa. They don't like him, vice versa. But what I find on the internet is like people who aren't trained, aren't experts, they latch to that scholar they like and they run with that. Yeah. Whereas I'll have a conversation with Richard, and he knows I think there's probably a guy, but I actually entertain in my discussions, what if he's right? And I go, and then if sometimes he'll say something that I know that a historicist would have an answer for or respond, maybe this is what a historicist says, I'll like say, hey, so the historicist position would say something like this, right? Sure. And then, you know what I find interesting? Something interesting for those who want to go back and watch some of these. Richard will go, yeah, actually the historicist says, and it could be. Yeah. And you go, where's the dogmatism in this? Where's this? Jesus couldn't have existed, and and it's like, dude, chill. Yeah. What I think happens is there's a confidence level that Richard brings, and then people who aren't experts who follow take that and go, I'm taking that as the definitive conclusion.
I'll give you a perfect example from my new book that's coming out here in the next couple months, the second edition to the Old Testament Endure Slavery. And I don't normally break any new ground, right? Because that's not really what my writing is supposed to do. But in the research that I was doing, I came across something, and I won't give it away here. Yeah. But it does seem like there is a law. It's fragmentary, right? It's not in a well-preserved portion of the law collection. But I think there's very good reason to have it reconstructed in the way that it's reconstructed. And I think that it probably shows that this idea that all the other ancient Near Eastern law collections outside of the Old Testament, in this particular circumstance, apologists will argue that, oh, look how awful the ancient Near Eastern law collections were, how immoral they were. The Bible really got it right. This seems to speak against that. Now, in the book, I say, look, this is the reading that I take. This is why I think it's probably right. But keep in mind that it is a fragmentary law, right. So there are some reconstructions in it. But if it is the case that this is what it says, then I think this is what it implies. It would be inappropriate for someone reading my book online to take it and go online and be like, yeah, this is true, right? And this is the way that it is, when I've presented it in such a way to say, I'm not sure. This is my level of certainty, as you said. Mm-hmm. And we should all, until more data comes forward that can support it or discount it, we should probably maintain something akin to this. But one thing that I will say, and that we were talking about offline, one of the things that I think everybody knows and loves about Israel Finkelstein is that he keeps the archaeological world on its toes. And that's what this sort of thing does, this, taking these paths and seeing where they lead and constructing arguments to see if they work. Because see, here's how this works. We have data points. I know I say this all the time, but we have data points. We have this fact and this fact over here. Like we have this text and we have this archaeological context and we have this piece of material culture or whatever. we're all or in slavery, right? We have this law, we have this law, we have this law, we have this contract. We're all working with the same data points.
Right.
In the same way that we're all working with the same puzzle pieces. If I arrange them all in this way, this is the picture that I get.
Right.
And it looks okay, but boy, there's some weird stuff going on over here, and so maybe this isn't the right way to arrange these puzzle pieces. Let me see if I arrange them this other way, right? It's a little better, but not quite, right? It's tricky, and it can cost you a lot of time, and it can cost you like some prestige, maybe. Who knows? It can make people upset at you if you keep rearranging the puzzle pieces to try to have a better interpretive model to understand how those puzzle pieces, those data points go together. Mm-hmm. And you could spend a lot of time rearranging all those puzzle pieces only to go, that doesn't work very well, right? But what it does, it was some of these scholars, the boldness, I think, to be able to say, I'm going to come up with a new framework. And I may lose a bunch of time, and I may spin my wheels, but I'm going to do it. Like, the field needs that, because when Finkelstein comes out and says, actually, we've been understanding this incorrectly, here's my argument for that, ultimately, he might be wrong.
Right.
And I think he would readily say that. But it makes everybody go, all right, how do we know the position that we've held is correct? And let me be clear, 99.9% of the time when those types of things happen, it's not that it's crumbling the entire foundation of everything that scholars have argued for.
Right.
People in certain fringe positions would hope that that's the case. It's not. It's usually something where we've been going this direction and we're now going this direction, right? It's not that we've been going this direction and now we're going to go this direction.
Rarely do you find out the Earth circles around the sun.
Right.
Heliocentric or something,
And the people that are making these corrections, and I hope this doesn't sound elitist. I don't mean it to. I think it's just the fact of the matter is that the people that can make these kinds of adjustments are people that have spent the time mastering all the foundational material. And they then can build upon that, take everybody else's arguments into account, weigh them out, have all the puzzle pieces in front of them, and rearrange them in a way that accounts for all the other foundational data points. And say they can then say, aha, I think it actually should be this way. That's what dissertations do, right? That's what monographs do, is they're intended to shift the field to get it even more accurate.
There's so many difficulties on trying to really get down to this issue that we find mythicism, and it even comes down to like the interpretation of these particular words or the meanings of words. There's so much. And what I find with the work, particularly that I see Richard has done, I love learning all the stuff he says, including his mythicism work, because it helps me try to understand my position better. But there's a lot of positions in it where there will be an idea that, not always the case here, but an idea that a historicist takes that is already a fringe view, and then if you collect 15 of those historicist arguments in different areas that are the fringe view of a historicist, put the pieces together kind of, and not all of them are fringe. Some of them, are pretty mainstream. But you kind of put them all together and you puzzle piece those things together. Next thing you know, you have this plausible path for mythicism making the most sense.
Yeah.
And so, like, you name it, it could be something. But, like, even an interpretation of Galatians 1 with, I received this gospel through vision, my gospel. One of the interpretations that comes up is that Paul didn't hear anything from anyone before. It was really just a received revelation that he got directly from Christ, that his gospel is being, what is being proclaimed. And I don't buy that Paul didn't get something from the earlier apostles when he lists in 1 Corinthians 15 about these supposed earlier people who supposedly witnessed or saw the Lord. I think that he's gained some knowledge, especially if he persecuted this group. He says in his own letters beforehand, you don't persecute people if you don't know why you're persecuting them. It's for their belief in this Jesus, it seems. But what gets interesting to me is that I think Paul's gospel is this Gentile version, this non-circumcision version. Well, That's my interpretation, and I have good reasons and arguments based on the evidence, how I line that up, that makes sense. There are some people who come in and go, no, his gospel is Christ crucified, and it's literally a crucified celestial angelic figure, and there are certain versions of mythicists who make this argument. I don't want to straw man anyone else's, but it goes on and on in this interpretation, and I'm like, okay, it'll never end.
Yeah.
My goal in this question asking you whether you fall into this, and we did this long consensus thing, and then to talk about why I think this is important that scholars can see things and run down those paths to see, is there something to it? Sometimes he'll take old stuff and bring it back as new. Sometimes he's got new ideas that you've never heard before. Yeah. All of this, and I love that. But I want the audiences online to not run around being overly dogmatic, mythicist, historicist. I say there's probably a guy, but like a lot of people run around saying there was a guy, act like they know what he did on Wednesday, they can, because the Bible says. Yeah. So you have the extreme, everything the text says is what happened and Jesus did, and it's historical, to the full on, everything you see in this text is made up. It's completely mythical. There is no actual kernels of history you can find. And then you kind of find that the consensus kind of goes, actually, I think there really, may have been a struggle by this Jewish guy who came from a very poor area with people who are downtrodden and have less than. His message seems to match what you would see Jewish people in this region coming up with, saying, take care of the poor. It has a philosophical slant toward, don't store up your riches here. I can imagine someone who is poor and less fortunate in a struggle with Rome ruling his people having this kind of message. So can I prove it? No. But there's a reason they think behind the mirage there might be something there.
And let me end this maybe with something that I think everybody would agree with. Every scholar that we've talked about. In 98% of the cases, I think anybody that has gone through and gained this expertise in their particular field, they're going to say, look, if you don't have an expertise in this particular field, particularly with something that is not like some new idea that some archaeologist has come out with, right, that he's just published an article on things that are considered foundational to the field, I think in most cases, if you don't have that expertise, rely on what the scholars say as a consensus. And I think most of the academics that we're talking about here would all say that. Certainly I would. And I think it's the only way we function in life, frankly. Because a type of hyper-skepticism, I think, what do you do? Where do you go? Mm-hmm. And I would say that in my experience with my area of expertise, the times that I look at what everybody in the field agrees on, and then I research that, look at the data points themselves, not just of the positions, and I put the puzzle pieces together myself, it's I see why we all think this, right? There's a reason, for example, that everybody knows that Lugal means king in Sumerian, right? Or Sharu in Akkadian or whatever, or Melech in Hebrew. There's a reason we know that. And I think being able to, as a very general rule, with few exceptions, when something comes up and everybody in a particular field that has this particular subject matter expert, I'm not talking about Dr. So-and-so who actually has a PhD in astronomy is commenting on a Hebrew, word. That's not what I'm talking about, right? It's the people that have gone and gotten their PhD in Semitics or PhD in OT studies or whatever, and they make those people that are subject matter experts say, yes, we all agree on this. There's a reason. And I think everybody would probably say that for the most part, with few exceptions, we should feel comfortable saying, yeah, if everybody agrees on this, we should lean on that. But if we're going to buck against it, we need to take the time to, in most cases, I suspect, get the necessary qualifications in the field to be able to do that research. So what I will say is, if you think X isn't right and all the scholars hold to it, but you think it's wrong, go get your PhD.
Mm-hmm. And that's what Richard did.
Yeah.
Which makes me wonder, another question. Finkelstein bucks against the consensus. They take him serious.
Yes.
And I think that Richard tries, and some people might take him serious, but there's a lot that don't. And I'm wondering if there's a different political, social dynamic in New Testament studies than what you're dealing with or what the Old Testament, maybe not. Maybe, I mean, look at how Ronald Hindle reacted to Hoffmeyer and these evangelicals who want to act like the Exodus is really what actually happened literally and stuff. Yeah. So there seems to be this issue, but it seems that the New Testament scholarship people aren't taking Richard's work seriously. And so there's a lot of issues.
It'd be a really interesting question, I think, to ask somebody like Bart. Dr. Ehrman.
Well, I know that him and they don't.
But clash. I think that he'll be. I would think that he'll be honest, like, and think critically about, like, if that is the case, and if so, why. I mean, I think he'd know that.
Maybe I'll ask him.
Yeah, I think it'd be a good question.
Thank you.